Hello, New College. It's an honor to be here. Hello to my distinguished Florida colleagues from other institutions as well. I'm here to talk to you today about academic freedom in the sunshine. And after spending this morning getting a tour of your beautiful campus, I can tell you that New College definitely still has one of those things. Seriously, it's wonderful to be here taking advantage of the academic freedom and free expression that this campus has always been known for. I can't think of a place I'd rather be to talk about the importance of free speech on campus than right here, on the front lines of the fight for free colleges and universities in our free society. And I commend President Corcoran and the Board of Trustees for allowing this conversation to happen here on the New College campus. In fact, I was hoping one of your trustees, my old friend Chris Rufo, would be here today to witness this inspiring academic conversation about academic freedom that we've just heard, particularly this last panel. But reading through Chris's Twitter account, I learned that he's spending this month in Budapest with his other friend, a higher ed strategist who helped Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban ban a university back in 2017. So while I'm sure Chris is having stimulating conversations about academic freedom just as we are, I think he might benefit a little more from the conversation here in this room. Like Chris, and like most of New College's other new trustees, I'm not from around here, or even from Florida, or a neighboring state. Although I should mention that three of Penn America's trustees do live in Florida, which means we have almost as many trustees from Florida as you do. Here's another thing I have in common with your new trustees. I believe that the best way to truly understand the character of a college is to find out what Republican politicians think about it. So I checked, and here's what I found. Let me read you a few quotes. Here's the first one. New College is academic rigor with freedom and diversity of thought. Very rigorous studies, but students structure their course of study with their academic advisor, with a professor, and diversity of thought. Ever since I was student government president there, it's characterized New College. I think respect for diversity of thought is more important now than ever. Anyone know who said that? That is former Republican Congressman Lincoln Diaz-Balart, New College class of 1975. Speaking in 2021, just 2 years ago. Here's another one. New College has a very special national reputation, and we just don't want to have it flushed down the toilet. I'm very uncomfortable about someone from another part of the state telling us what we need to do in our backyard. They're going to have a hell of a fight on their hands. That one? Anyone? Vern Buchanan, current Republican congressman, in 2020 defending New College against an attempt by the state to merge it into Florida State University. All right, here's one more. Florida's only honors college, New College of Florida, is a beacon of shining success as an independent collegiate institution in Sarasota. It has been ranked at or near the top of college listings nationwide on multiple measurements, from academic achievement to value to Fulbright fellowships and many more. Since it became an independent institution in 2001, the achievements gained by New College have been staggering. It is clear that the per-student value is considerably higher than the rest of the state's institutions of higher learning. That one? Anyone? Joe Gruters, former Florida Republican Party chair, also in 2020. Okay, look. I understand New College isn't for everyone. An environment of rigorous academics and individualized study where students feel welcomed and challenged at the same time, where they have a hand in shaping their own course of study, where they get one-on-one attention from their professors in small classes that would otherwise only be available to rich kids at elite private schools. That doesn't have universal appeal. It's not what everyone wants. I get it. But still, reading those comments from three of this region's most prominent political leaders, all Republicans, praising New College and its identity just in the last 3 years, I have to ask you all, what's changed? Did New College suddenly become a poor value? Did it drop its unique curriculum when I wasn't looking? Did it switch to 300 student lecture classes? Did it become exclusionary or unwelcoming? Well, at least before January. Because just 3 years ago, there was bipartisan agreement that this school was special and that its unique mission ought to be preserved. Now, the state has handed it over to a group of out-of-state political operatives with the mandate, as the governor put it, to make New College a Hillsdale of the South. Clearly, someone in Tallahassee is paying less attention to what local Republican politicians think about New College than I am. For his part, Chris, my friend Chris, says that New College, in his words, has a culture problem. And I want to congratulate him. In just 2 months on the job, Chris has indeed made great personal strides in changing New College's culture. He has made fun of the chosen pronouns of a New College staff member the school had just fired. He has called 2 professors' research pure left-wing Mad Libs and said it's lucky that both are visiting professors because they'd be easier to fire. He has described some New College faculty as bullying and intimidating people. He has attacked, I thought that was an interesting comment as well. He has attacked parents of New College students, an excellent strategy for attracting and retaining students, by the way, to attack their parents as helicopter parents and coddlers for protesting the board's actions. And he has even mocked a New College student on Twitter for saying she was sad about the takeover of the New College board. I believe Chris was describing the culture he hopes to create here at New College when he tweeted, "Winning is better than being nice." You know, what's happening at New College is personal for me. As a high school graduate in Arizona, I had heard of New College, believe it or not. I knew of it as a shining light in American higher education, an idyllic place where students could focus on learning, design their own majors, get personal attention from their professors, all for the price of public tuition. While I didn't end up applying to New College, I crossed the country to enroll at another public liberal arts college, St. Mary's College of Maryland. St. Mary's, yeah, represent. St. Mary's was a place where leaders were trained, just like New College is. One of my classmates is now the mayor of Baltimore. Another is the county executive of Frederick County, Maryland. A third nearly became the mayor of Washington, D.C. That's what happens at a place like that, or like this, when you democratize individualized instruction and attention and invest significant resources in helping students learn and lead, even when those students can't afford private school tuition. That's what happens at a place, a college, where you learn that everyone matters, even you, and that every idea matters, even yours. College was a life-changing experience for me, and in a way I never left. After I graduated from St. Mary's, I went to graduate school and became a historian. I wrote a book about charismatic leaders and movements in the early 20th century United States. For 4 years, I was a professor and then a hybrid administrator in rural Utah. In fact, I've never taught at a school that wasn't public, and I've never taught anywhere that wasn't in a red state. In Utah, where I ran an Institute of Politics and Public Affairs, I invited Republican congressmen, state legislators, and the leaders of a prominent conservative think tank to campus. And now I work at PEN America, a 100-year-old free speech organization committed to the principle that campuses need more viewpoint diversity and that conservative voices should be heard and not shouted down. In a way, I'm still replicating the lesson I learned at St. Mary's and that you learn at any public liberal arts college, that everyone and every idea deserves both a fair hearing and fair criticism. Only it seems that too many Americans today haven't learned that lesson, and for some reason, a whole lot of them are blaming that on New College. And that brings us back to the question, what changed at New College that suddenly turned an impressive school with a storied history into a hub of indoctrination so nefarious it required a takeover by out-of-state political operatives? You know, I've spent a lot of time thinking about and studying that question, and here's the only answer that makes sense. Nothing. Nothing at all changed at New College. Instead, things changed everywhere else. So let me take you back to the summer of 2020. It was a moment of reckoning for many Americans as they grappled with the difficult racial history of their nation, many of them for the first time. The George Floyd protests were revealing cavernous racial wounds across the country. The New York Times 1619 Project, in its various forms, was among the most widely read material in the nation. For those who hoped to redress centuries of racial inequality, the future looked bright. And then there was a backlash. The story of that backlash is the story that brings us here today. And it begins, as it ends, with Chris. A note before we get to that. I talk about Chris as my old friend, even though we've never met. But I've spent so much time over the past 3 years trying to save higher education from Chris that it sometimes seems we're joined at the hip. In fact, I often think of him as my business partner, because Chris is probably the best thing that's ever happened to my career. So before we start, let me dedicate this story with gratitude to Chris. Thanks for everything, buddy. On September 2nd, 2020, Chris went on Tucker Carlson and declared that, and I quote, critical race theory, that's how he said it, critical race theory has pervaded every part of the federal government. He described it as an existential threat to the United States and called on President Trump to ban critical race theory from trainings at government agencies. Trump watched the segment, and within 3 weeks, Chris was helping the White House draft Executive Order 13950 on race and sex stereotyping. The executive order banned from trainings a series of 9 so-called divisive concepts that read like a caricature of actual critical race theory, but not like anything that anyone would actually teach. One of the concepts, for instance, was that one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. Well, okay, sure, we'll give him that one. I guess that we can all agree that's a bad idea. And also, if you find a teacher teaching that, let me know, because I think it's pretty rare. Another of the divisive concepts was that the United States is fundamentally racist or sexist. That word fundamentally is doing a whole lot of work in that sentence. What does fundamentally mean? Historically? Statistically? It's not defined in the order, so we just have to guess, I suppose. A third was that members of one race or sex cannot and should not attempt to treat others without respect to race or sex. That is, that colorblindness may not be possible in a world where everyone really does see race. Under the order, that idea, what I just said, was a divisive concept and couldn't be included in trainings. A fourth was that an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partly because of his or her race or sex. Now, here's where things start to get tricky. Does affirmative action result in adverse treatment for some people because of their race? What about reparations? Does this order say you can't advocate for affirmative action or reparations in trainings? Or does it say that you can't mention that affirmative action or reparations exist and that some people agree with them? See, that's the problem with all this. This language isn't just banning policies. It's banning ideas. It's saying that in some settings, at first just trainings in federal agencies, you can't even talk about ideas that the government doesn't like. PEN America calls this language an educational gag order, because that's what it is, a government restriction on what people can read and write and teach and learn. That's where all of this started, with just a little bit of government censorship of speech about race that made some people uncomfortable. Trump's executive order never went into effect. It was stayed by a court, and then President Biden revoked it on his first day in office. But Chris wasn't finished. We have successfully frozen their brand, critical race theory, into the public conversation and are steadily driving up negative perceptions, he wrote on Twitter in March 2021. We will eventually turn it toxic as we put all of the various cultural insanities under that brand category. The goal is to have the public read something crazy in the newspaper and immediately think critical race theory. We have decodified the term and will recodify it to annex the entire range of cultural constructions that are unpopular with Americans. The place to do all that decodifying and recodifying, to call things critical race theory that aren't critical race theory, was in state legislatures. The language of the divisive concepts escaped the White House and headed for the states. It moved so quickly that the Beltway organizations promoting it didn't have time to cover their tracks to make it seem like a series of local initiatives. No, one copy of the model legislation still lives on the website of a Washington think tank under the file name Model School Board Language to Ban CRT SDHCS Edits 1. I've never been able to figure out who SD or HCS are, but if you know, please let me know. 54 of these educational gag orders were introduced in state legislatures in 2021. 12 of them became law. And something happened to these bills on the way to the state legislature. They stopped being about government trainings and started being about K-12 and college classrooms. In a way, it makes sense that public education became an easy target for the rising tide of censorship. 2021 was simply an inconvenient moment for public schools. During the pandemic, parents got to see teachers in action via remote learning, and they saw them at their worst, doing something that wasn't working for teachers or for students. Nobody was happy with the results, including the teachers doing it, and it makes sense that public schools were ripe for scapegoating for a variety of social ills. Higher education is more complicated, but if you look at Pew polls and other longitudinal studies, a picture does begin to emerge. Concerns about tenured radicals in universities have been a constant since at least the 1960s. But after the Great Recession, in the early 2010s, conservative views of higher education simply fell off a cliff. In 2019, only 33% of self-identified Republicans thought higher education had a positive impact on American society. That's not the humanities department. That's the nursing program and the business school and the engineering department. That's the whole thing. And it turns out that if you don't value the real estate anymore, suddenly arson doesn't seem so bad. In November 2021, the educational censorship movement was turbocharged by Glenn Youngkin's come-from-behind victory in the Virginia governor's race. Youngkin had run a campaign focused on attacking critical race theory and public education, and it worked. Now, a close look at the polls showed that his attacks weren't necessarily particularly popular, and that the real deciding factor in the race was Youngkin's opponent saying, "I don't think parents should be telling students what they should teach," then refusing to walk back his own unforced error for a month and a half. In fact, polls show that the actual things educational gag orders ban, like the teaching of the honest history of race, even if it makes students uncomfortable, are broadly popular, including among a majority of Republicans. Nevertheless, conservative lawmakers saw Youngkin's election as evidence that educational gag orders were popular not only among the base, but with swing voters as well, a classic wedge issue. "I look at this," said Steve Bannon, "and say, hey, this is how we're going to win. I see 50 House Republican seats in 2022. Keep this up." By the way, there were not 50 House Republican seats in 2022. What there was, however, was an avalanche of new educational gag orders, more than twice as many as the year before, nearly 3 times as many, and they were more likely to include punishments for schools and teachers who violated them, and they were more likely to include higher ed in addition to K-12. In 2021, only 30% of these bills included higher ed, but by 2022, that number was up to 40%. In total, including this year, we've counted over 300 gag order proposals in 44 states. 21 have passed, and counting state policies and executive orders, gag orders are currently in effect in 18 states, home to 118 million Americans, over 1/3 of the US population. 7 states, with 42 million residents, have gag orders that focus on higher ed. Now, the results of this legislation in colleges and universities have been stark. Sociology courses on race have been canceled in Florida and Oklahoma. In Idaho and Iowa, colleges and universities have issued guidances restricting discussions of abortion, contraception, and the civil rights movement, again, citing new state laws. In South Dakota, the State Department of Education pressured all public and private colleges, including tribal colleges, to edit the description of an Indian studies course for student teachers to remove a requirement that the course establish a fundamental awareness of race and gender bias, stereotyping, assumptions, etc. Just to reiterate, you can no longer teach about a fundamental awareness of race and gender bias, stereotyping, or assumptions in an Indian studies course in South Dakota for student teachers. And it could get worse, and not just for history, English, education, and gender and ethnic studies, the obvious targets of these laws. Faculty in mathematics, business, and the health sciences could find themselves unable to mention in class statistics about racial disparities. Concurrent enrollment courses taught by college faculty in high schools could be censored. And the very system of higher ed accreditation, the guarantee of quality that separates real colleges like New College from diploma mills, and that enables students to qualify for federal financial aid, which 83% of American students use, could be at risk, as these laws usurp the work of governing boards, a requirement of accreditation, and hand it over to politicians. That would be a disastrous outcome for higher ed. And that brings us to what's happening here at New College and across the nation right now. Because in 2023, Chris and his friends decided that censoring what happened in college classrooms wasn't enough. Instead, it was time for the government to go an order of magnitude bigger, to pass laws allowing politicians to control everything that a college does. No one will teach critical race theory, they reason, if no college gets to make its own decisions about what should be taught. The takeover at New College is the logical end result of that line of thinking, and so too is Florida HB 999. They're a demonstration of what happens when you start with just a little government censorship and keep going until you swallow up the whole system of higher education. I described it to the New York Times as an apocalyptic bill, after which Southern Baptist leader Al Mohler amusingly chided me for using the term apocalyptic in vain. But this actually happened. It was great. But you know what? The shoe fits. Borrowing heavily from policies enacted by Chris's friends in Hungary, HB 999 would enact the most draconian and censorious restrictions on public higher education anywhere in the country. It would ban gender and ethnic studies majors and diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, hand control of university mission statements, core curricula, and faculty hiring and firing to political appointees, enable boards of trustees to initiate a 10-year review of any faculty member at any time, and empower presidents and boards of trustees to hire any faculty members they want, regardless of whether they were recommended by faculty hiring committees or even applied for the job. In other words, if Uncle Joe wants a job and knows a trustee, Uncle Joe gets to be the next history professor at New College, no matter whether he's qualified or whether the history faculty want him. HB 999 would also require that all general education courses must promote the values necessary to preserve the constitutional republic through traditional, historically accurate coursework. And it would ban courses in general education curricula, quote, based on unproven, theoretical, or exploratory content, as defined by political appointees. Of course, theoretical content is what the entire sciences are made of, so it's unclear whether they would survive such a provision. In essence, it would end academic freedom, shared governance, and university independence in Florida public higher education, placing all decisions ultimately under the control of one man. In doing so, it would destroy the spirit of free inquiry in Florida colleges, replacing it with a pervasive climate of fear. What started in Florida is already being exported across the country, often in even more extreme ways. In Ohio, a bill would extend the prohibitions of HB 999 to private colleges, not just public ones. And in Texas, a new bill would create a statewide blacklist for faculty and staff who violate a vague set of prohibitions on DEI, banning them from employment at any state higher education institution for 1 year or for 5 years after a second violation. Yes, you heard that right, an actual McCarthy-style blacklist. Imagine learning about the Hollywood blacklist in the McCarthy era and saying, that sounds like a great idea, but this time, let's go after college teachers and let's not have an unofficial blacklist, which is what the Hollywood blacklist was. Let's mandate it in law. That's what Texas lawmakers are considering. McCarthyism on steroids. Chris, of course, my old friend Chris, doesn't share my concerns about these bills. He's made it very clear that he's planning to export the New College takeover to the rest of the country. And he likes to say that what he and his friends are doing at New College and what he is promoting around the country is democracy in action. For public college professors to teach what they are trained and hired to teach history and psychology and chemistry and business and engineering and nursing and African American studies and gender studies and, yes, critical race theory, and all of the other things that our nation's public college professors study and teach is tyranny, he says. Why? Because the taxpayers pay their salaries. According to Chris, it is tyranny for public college professors to teach unpopular ideas. The taxpayers, he says, should not have to pay for experts in a public college to say things that the taxpayers don't agree with. That's tyranny. That's indoctrination. Chris thinks this is his strongest argument. As he puts it, reestablishing public ownership and public authority over our public institutions. That's a quote. You can have the rule of the bureaucrats, he says, or you can have the rule of the people. He wants the public to say, these are our values and we expect them to be reflected in our public institutions, and we're not going to keep paying money to things that are against our wishes. And you know what? I agree with Chris. And all of you should too. Because here's the truth. The taxpayers do pay for public colleges. They pay for public colleges to be colleges, environments of intellectual freedom and open inquiry. Institutions like New College are one of the last places in our polarized nation where people of all backgrounds and all viewpoints can come together and have an honest conversation about the world we live in. That's why colleges are an essential guarantor of democracy. They prepare students to be citizens better than any other system we've ever devised. But that only happens if those students are free to think and to speak and to learn without government censorship. When taxpayers fund a playground or a ball field, everyone gets to use it, not just the popular kids. And when they pay for a college, they do it so that every idea can get a fair hearing, not just the popular ones. If you want to fund only the ideas you like, go buy yourself some propaganda. If you fund a college, you're paying for intellectual freedom. That's what a college is and what it must be, a place where everyone and every idea are welcome. Otherwise, it's not a college at all. And yes, there is groupthink in universities. If you want to increase viewpoint diversity in colleges, give me a call. I'll be first in line to help. It's literally my job. But what is happening at New College and elsewhere is not about promoting viewpoint diversity. It's about being so afraid of the possibility of groupthink that you enact the official government suppression of ideas. It's about firing people you disagree with in the name of promoting free speech. It's about sitting on stage as a trustee and telling faculty they're bullying and intimidating people, then firing the college president on your first day in office. That's not viewpoint diversity, that is authoritarian control. And authoritarian control of public colleges should terrify us all. A New College student put it best holding a sign at a protest. The sign said, "Big gov hands off our small school." Big gov hands off our small school. So what can you do to stop this? How do you protect your college and your students from being consumed by all this madness? How do you defend higher education at this school and in this state? I have 3 suggestions. First, don't do the censors' work for them. Don't stop teaching what you know, what you're trained to teach, what your students need to hear, unless someone explicitly tells you you have to. Let me be clear. I'm not suggesting you should intentionally violate a policy and get fired. On the contrary, these students and this campus are better off with you and your job than with whomever would replace you. And some of you have other considerations. Besides, if you have kids to support or a sick or uninsured family member or a pension, you need to be exceptionally careful. If you're already planning to leave, of course, you probably don't have to be careful at all. But for most of you, those in the middle, you should work to counteract the chilling effect that these laws and policies create. Because the vagueness of these laws is the point. Students in the K-12 studies in the K-12 space have shown clearly that the work of censorship and educational gag orders is done primarily not through official enforcement, but through 2 other mechanisms. Administrative censorship, when administrators ban faculty from teaching certain subjects out of fear that the vague laws might apply, or self-censorship, when faculty make the same decision about their own classes on their own. So don't do that. Don't court controversy, but don't back down from your subject matter out of expediency either. If someone's going to deprive your students of the content they need, let it be someone else. Second, speak up and show up. Again, disregard this advice if you've got special circumstances that make your job more precious than just a job. But if you can, tell the community and the country what's happening here. Tell them about the big gov hands on your small school, which, by the way, polling shows is the very best messaging against educational gag orders. Tell them that government censorship is making teachers afraid to teach and students afraid to learn. That's the other most effective message. Write op-eds, letters to the editor, do media, talk to your family and friends. Be the calm, eloquent voice of reason and normalcy, drawing a clear contrast with the culture warriors on the march. So many battles in both legislation and public opinion are won by a handful of people showing up and being heard. Many of you are already doing this. Don't let up. Finally, seek out allies. So much of what's happening here is unprecedented in recent history. But this totalizing attack on a college and on the entire higher education system has created an equally unprecedented opportunity for higher education to work together. I like to remind people, when lawmakers come for the oil and gas industry, they don't worry about petty feuds or whether it's prudent for them to respond. They spring into action, adopt the most effective strategies, and fight for their sector, and they usually win. The difference between higher ed and the oil and gas industry is that our sector actually benefits society. There shouldn't be a difference in how effectively we defend our sector from legislative incursions, but too often there is. We all know that higher education is notoriously fractious. Under normal circumstances, everyone argues with everyone else. But these aren't normal circumstances. Right now, faculty and staff, administrators, and students and alumni, college and community leaders from New College and other colleges, from Florida and from other states, have the same enemy: educational censorship. We're used to the politics of higher education being complex, but this time it's very simple. We're all on the same side. The time is now for unprecedented coalition building, for sector-wide solidarity, for collective action across institutions and states. Look, friends, I'm not going to lie to you. I can't stand up here getting ready to catch a flight back to my cushy job in Washington, D.C. and tell you that everything is going to be fine here at New College. Because it probably isn't. I can't tell you that HB 999 isn't going to pass, because it probably is. This time next year, some of you probably won't have your jobs. Some of you probably won't want the jobs you do have. The forces arrayed against you are powerful, and they've made it their mission to make Florida the place where free speech and public higher education go to die. Only, I don't think they're right about that. Maybe I'm a blind optimist, but I don't think this is where higher education in America dies. I think this, right here, right now, today, is where the defense of American higher education is born. Higher education is not defenseless. It has its champions, an army of us all across this country, ready to fight for academic freedom. And from what I see here today on the front lines, those who want to use government power to silence this college do indeed have a hell of a fight on their hands. You shouldn't have to fight for the right to teach and do research in your subject areas, to do your jobs, while trying to do them at the same time. It's exhausting and unfair. But let me tell you something. This fight matters even if you lose. It matters for the students at this college who are trying to learn and live in the midst of this madness. And it matters for the rest of the country that every inch of turf the censors take is as painful and slow as possible. Every roadblock they face here, every delay, every bad poll, every sympathetic story of the little college that could is a message and a warning to legislators in other states that censorship comes with a political cost. There are places, many of them, where that will matter. I've seen it happen many times over the last few years. Censorship never stops unless we stop it. Moments in history like this are where heroes of free expression are made. And the best heroes are the ones who never asked to be heroes in the first place. Thank you for inviting me here today. You inspire me. Thank you for your service to American higher education. Thank you for your bravery in this bleakest of moments. The darkest day only comes once a year, and it's up to all of us working together to drive away this cloud of censorship that hangs over higher education and put academic freedom back in the sunshine where it belongs. Thank you. Thank you all. I'll take questions. And I think you can just shout them out. I think that's our approach for this. So we're not going to do the note card thing. Just, yes, go ahead.
If you could ask, drawing your training as an American historian of populism, I mean, part of what you were thinking about is Gilded Age populism. President Gothard described what we're facing as fascism. How would you describe the difference between populism and Rufo's idea that the people should control education, and fascism, which oftentimes overlaps with populism? How would you see those as two similar or different things?
Thank you for that question. So this for the live stream, I'm going to restate the questions as I get them. The question was, because I'm an American historian, and my friend here knows that, getting me in trouble here, what is the difference between populism and fascism, and how is what Rufo doing, one or the other or both? So I'll talk about populism. In my professional opinion, populism is neither good nor bad. Populism is a tool. It is an approach to governance. It is a strategy. And it can be used for very good things. It can be used to rally support for social justice, for important causes. It can also be used to censor. It can be used to inaugurate authoritarianism. What we're seeing from these sort of populist arguments about democracy and voters, taxpayers affecting higher education, I would argue that that is false populism. I would argue that it is advancing an understanding of how government works that is incorrect, that is false, that is perhaps intentionally false, and that is suggesting that in order for people to have something for collectively that they value, they have to regulate it into non-existence. It's very strange to hear this idea coming from the right, as you might imagine, that we need more government power to regulate things that are being run. But it's not really a populist idea. We do want people. He's right. Taxpayers want colleges. They want ball fields, and they want playgrounds, and they want all sorts of public amenities. They want to build roads. It doesn't mean that the taxpayers need to stand there and lay the asphalt. This is not how government services work. It's not how institutions work, and it's particularly not how higher education works, which absolutely requires insulation from political governance in order to have an environment of intellectual freedom. If you want intellectual freedom, you cannot have politicians dictating every little thing that happens on a college. If you have that, you have no college at all. Other questions? Yes?
Is there some way to get a transcript of your remarks?
I have to think about that. The question was a transcript of my remarks. I have to think about that. But there is a video recording, and I believe it will be made available after the event. Yes.
Can I ask you to just expand a little bit upon one of the things that you said that really struck me is this notion that, and I think you're right, that a lot of this reaction or kind of rhetoric about wokeness actually kind of didn't start in the classroom at all. It started with people having bad reactions to like HR trainings and things like that. Can you speak a little bit about, and I think that's a very different context in the classroom, can you speak a little bit about how that resentment about the first thing kind of migrated to the second thing?
Yes, that's a good question. So the question is, did resentment about HR trainings around diversity migrate to the classroom? And it's a really interesting question. I mean, first of all, first thing we have to understand is way back in in the old times of the summer of 2020, right? White Fragility was the most popular book on the New York Times bestseller list, right? This was not something that was foisted on people from outside. People wanted this for a brief window of time. And then just as quickly they decided they didn't want it and were mad that they had it, even though they'd asked for it, right? So that's part of it. And there is this sort of thing about HR training, right? Okay, we don't defend, at Penn America, we don't defend particular types of trainings. We're an education unit primarily focused around higher ed and K-12. But I will say there is a lot of confusion, I think, sometimes between what happens in trainings that are designed to essentially check off a legal box to comply with some sort of a policy or a law, and actual honest discussions of things that happen. I had a conversation with someone who is I was on a panel with someone who's on the other side of this sort of divide in higher ed and a pretty prominent leader on that side. And we were talking afterwards, and this person said to me, diversity trainings are so terrible. There's just these 20-minute videos you have to take. And I'm like, no, that's not. What do you think this is? There's a total lack of awareness of how those box-checking exercises differ from open and honest conversation. The point of, and look, I'm not going to say that there aren't trainings that make lots of people uncomfortable. There are the trainings that really do sort of veer off into, you can only say one side makes sense. But there are many trainings that don't. This is an educational mode of delivery, and then how does that get imposed onto higher ed and K-12? I think it's just as an excuse. I think it's just the scapegoating of these institutions because there are many liberal professors. The majority of professors are liberal. The majority of students are liberal. That's true, and maybe it's not a desirable thing. But it is not the same thing as indoctrination. I'll tell you this is a rambling answer, but there have been two really good studies about this, about conservative student speech on campuses. One came out in the last couple of years. One came out of the UNC system and the other out of the Wisconsin system. And what they showed is that conservatives are in fact afraid to say what they think, but they're not afraid to say what they think in the classroom. They're afraid to say what they think outside of the classroom to their liberal peers. And what they're really afraid of is that they'll get judged or shunned or go viral on social media for saying the wrong thing. Now, I'm not saying that's not a problem. It is a problem. But it is if what they're afraid of is students, then maybe cracking down on teachers isn't the solution. Maybe the solution is a sort of a campus climate revolution. Maybe the solution is free expression education in orientations, or free expression programming throughout the year, or maybe the kind of climate that already exists right now here at New College, where students do feel free, as far as I can tell, to engage in very difficult conversations they might not feel free to engage in at other institutions. So there is a problem and there is a policy solution, but it's not the same as what's being discussed here. Yes?
unwelcome, disagreeable, or offensive. And then the year after that, we passed Stop Woke Act. And then this year, we have HB 999. I'm finding it, I will be here next year to keep fighting the good fight. I will be in the Florida legislature as I have been this semester, this past session. When people ask me, why should we stay and fight and try, I don't have a good answer. Because I don't, if we can go that fast, if we can go from being one of the first states to actually define academic freedom and law and define shielding and law to this, I can't give them a good reason not to just sort of cut off the blood vessel and leave. What is your sort of response to that?
It's a good question. So the question broadly was about the free speech shield law in 2021 and how the switch has flipped so quickly toward censorship in legislative sessions here in Florida just over the last 2 sessions, and what then the value is to stay and fight the good fight. Well, so I have a number of answers here. One is, that's general guidance, and if an individual wants to leave, I'm not going to tell them not to. Certainly, I don't live in Florida. I can't tell someone else to do it. But not that I would mind living in Florida, but it's not where I live. It's not where my family is. What I would say is, there are a lot of students in Florida who attend college in Florida because they live in Florida, and because they are, they need to live at home when they go to school for money reasons, for family reasons, for other reasons, right? And they, they need to, those students need support no matter what is happening at the state legislature, no matter what is happening with the trustees or in any sort of institutional leadership role. I've had people ask me, I've had some people say it in some uncomfortable contexts, why don't we just de-accredit New College? And I tend to sort of throw them out of the room when they say that, because the answer is, this is, there are people here. There are students here, there are teachers here. This is a working institution which is serving and helping people, and if we destroy the village in order to save it, we are no better than the people we're fighting. Now, the second half of that question, the second answer I would say is, what is the sort of value more broadly of staying and fighting? And the truth is, I'm someone who watches state legislatures all across the country. There is no other state legislature in the entire country that is as captive to the state leadership as the one in Florida is. And what that means is every other state, including states that have passed bad legislation, there is someone in that legislature, there's someone in the Republican caucus in that legislature who is trying to find a way to stop this. And those people are empowered when they see takeovers like this be more difficult than anticipated, when they see pushback, when they see effective opposition, even if unsuccessful, when they see delaying tactics, and it matters to those other states what happens here. Now, it's a difficult thing for me to say to people in Florida, because the truth is, you helping people in North Dakota doesn't help you, right? And I have to acknowledge that, and that's why I go back to the first answer. If you need to leave, I'll be cheering for you either way, right? But that is the effect on a national level. What happened? Everyone in these other states is watching what is happening here right now.
And I am one of those students who really can't leave, and that's not the only reason I'm staying. I'm staying to fight, but I think more specifically, how do you not give into despair? I mean, we did get a norm established in law, and then we went right against it the very next session. Even the organizations that supported that law for free expression were dismayed at how fast they went against. How do you not give in to despair?
How do you not give in to despair? We were having this conversation yesterday, actually. How do you not give in to despair? Well, I would say this. These policies are going to hurt a lot of people in the short term and in the medium term. I don't believe they'll last forever. I don't believe that they will be unchallenged forever. I do think that, in a few years, in a generation, hopefully less than that, there will be a return to approaches that we had before. And I think that because there's a lot of historical evidence that that's happened before. The McCarthy era seemed, you ask somebody in January of 1954, is Joe McCarthy going to take over the whole country with what he's doing? And most people would have said yes. And 3 months later, it was over. And I think that these things go in cycles. We've seen this before. And there will be a brighter day. But is there going to be a brighter day this session, this year? Probably not. I'm not going to lie to you and say there will. So what I would say is I personally feel, and this is easy for me to say, I live in D.C., right? I personally feel less despairing the harder I'm fighting. And with the understanding that I'm taking breaks, that I'm giving myself some space, fighting it means as long as I'm fighting it, as long as I'm standing up for what matters, it's not all over. That's my own take. But it's an incomplete answer. It's not a completely satisfying answer. And the truth is, you're the person on the other end of these policies, and you you have to take care of yourself. That's the priority. Yes.
I know we're kind of basically up, but in relation to that, the issue of despair, we're trying to make meaning out of the tragedy we have. And thank you for holding this.
You're welcome. Thank you. And this is a powerful meaning-making exercise. It's powerful that you're all here. It matters. It's inspiring. It's a big deal. This is a big deal that you're here. I'm so thankful to all of you for letting me share this time with you and for inviting me here. Thank you.
All right, we are done, but thank you all for being here. I think the being together is the answer, right? So thanks.